Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is the second live stream of 2022. The first official one, I suppose. Last week we did something a bit different. It was a lot of fun, I have to say. I had James Hancock here, and we talked our way through the TV shows that are coming all the way through 2022. And top of that list, of course, is the show right behind me, House of the Dragon. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Specifically, we are going to be talking about Rhaenyra Targaryen, who is the center of this entire story. They could have taken the way they did the show, or are going to do the show, in a number of different ways, but one way could have been just telling Rhaenyra's story, because it is about her as much as anything else. We will get onto that in just one moment. What I try to do at the beginning of every live stream is just to give a flavor of some of the things happening in the wider fantasy world this week. There's not much this week, as you might expect, being quite early on in the year. Just a couple of things to flag up. If you were looking forward to the official Game of Thrones convention, which was going to be happening in Las Vegas next month, then that has been officially postponed. No date has been announced, but that is not going ahead next month. And the other thing, just to flag up something to look forward to, I did mention it last week, but I understand it's going to be happening relatively soon, is the Sandman TV show, which is the Neil Gaiman classic story, and it's looking great from what we've seen. We saw a snippet, the first couple of minutes of it, and it looks amazing. That should be coming to Netflix at some point quite soon, so that's something to be keeping an eye out for. Okay, I think what we'll do today is we will dive straight in to talk about Rhaenyra. I'm going to do what I did last week. I think it worked quite well, which is I will take all of the questions and the super chats in the second half of this live stream. So keep them coming. I am logging them all. I will be going through them, but I wanted, first of all, just to sort of have a period where I just set out from beginning to end, really, what is Rhaenyra's story, and then we can unpick it and try and see some of the key moments, and maybe try and understand what was driving her and what is going on underneath the story that we hear. So, Rhaenyra Targaryen, and I think what I will do is I will put up this picture here. Now, I don't know whether you can see that. It is a rather complicated looking family tree. This is a Targaryen family tree. It's one I know George R.R. Martin himself uses. I really like it. I will put a link to it down in the description afterwards. Rhaenyra is that person you see slap bang in the middle, sort of center middle, halfway up, slightly cross-looking figure here. She is at the heart, as you can see, of this rather complex web of Targaryen intermarriages. And we will talk through that. But first of all, where she comes from is that she is the only daughter, the only surviving child of her father, King Viserys, and Emma Arryn. Now, they did have 3 children. 2 of them died in childbirth, and she is the only surviving daughter. And as she grew up with these classic Targaryen features, and she grew up to be charming, to be intelligent, to be funny, to be everything you might want for a sort of a potential future leader. And sure enough, she was named by her father to be heir. Now, this was a bit controversial at the time, it had to be said. He was only on the throne himself because of a recently established tradition that a sort of male preference primogeniture kind of idea that only men can rule Westeros, only males can inherit the Targaryen line. And he decides that he wants her to be his heir. Until that moment, the heir presumptive, never named, but the heir presumptive was his younger brother, Damon Targaryen. Now, we'll be talking about Damon Targaryen quite a lot, I suspect, over the course of the live stream. He is central to huge amounts of what happens in Rhaenyra's story, and it's probably not an or an overstatement to say that at all of the key critical moments, he is there at her side. He kind of dips in and dips out, but he is there. I don't think we can quite go as far as we do when we're talking about the era 100 years or so later, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. I don't think we can quite say when in doubt, blame Damon Targaryen, but it's close. There's a lot of coincidences, a lot of things that he seems to be doing behind the scenes, particularly around manipulating what's happening around Rhaenyra. But when this first happens, as I say, he was the heir presumptive until somebody who he really didn't get on with, someone who hated him, Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, actually, perhaps slightly ironically, given what happens a few years later, he's the person to first suggest to Viserys, well, hang on a moment, we don't want Damon inheriting. Why don't you officially name your daughter Rhaenyra the heir? So the first suggestion that we hear, the first idea that she should be named the official heir, comes from Otto Hightower. And when Emma Arryn dies in childbirth, and the son that she gives birth to dies a day later, when that happens and Damon Targaryen is heard laughing down in Flea Bottom about the heir for a day, thinking that he's now back as being the heir again, then Viserys gets angry with his brother, and that's the point at which he officially makes Rhaenyra Targaryen the heir to the Iron Throne after him. So what happens with Damon is he sort of flits in and out of this story. He goes off, sometimes he's expelled, sometimes he goes off in a huff out into King's Landing, back out again, and so he's not an ever-present figure here, but he is definitely always important. But back to Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra then, for the next few years, she grew into this role as heir. She attended council meetings. Viserys got all of the lords of the realm to be swearing fealty to her as the heir, the Princess of Dragonstone. And she gets a member of the Kingsguard who is assigned to her personally, Sir Kristen Cole, who is quite important. We'll come to him in just one second. But she grows into this role, and obviously this range of suitors starts to appear, because if she is the heir, then obviously whoever marries her is going to be very important. The Prince Consort, perhaps, where they would be called. But then Viserys, her father, remarries, we know, to Alicent Hightower, and then Alicent has some children. You can see them there on that family tree. And then they are rival heirs. But Viserys stays close to what he originally said. He never changes his mind. He never diverts his attention. He always sticks to saying Rhaenyra is his heir. So, we then get the moment where she, if we fast forward to when she's late teens, she does need to get married. And the decision was made by Viserys. I'm cutting forward a little bit of history here, but the decision was made by Viserys to marry her to Laenor Velaryon. Now, this, from a Targaryen perspective, is a pretty reasonable match. The Velaryons are the closest allies. They're also a Valyrian race. They intermarry with the Targaryens a lot. Laenor's grandmother was a Targaryen, so there's a strong link there, and it kind of makes sense. The only two hitches are that Rhaenyra doesn't particularly get on with Laenor. There's no hint that they hate each other, but certainly is no love there. And secondly, Laenor's gay. Very clearly, it comes out across a lot of the different hints that we get from Fire and Blood, but he very clearly is. And she doesn't want to marry him. In the background, while this has been going on, we've had these two figures that I've been talking about who have been vying for her attention. We've got Damon Targaryen, who now seems to have moved from a position of thinking that he's going to be heir himself to realizing that actually he's dropped down. He can't play that I'm the male heir role anymore, because there's a couple of other male heirs, Alicent's two sons. So how's he going to get power? He starts courting, it would appear, Rhaenyra. Also, someone else who has this strong bond with her is Sir Kristen Cole of the Kingsguard. And the two of these alpha males clash. There's a very famous moment in one of the tourneys when they're there in the melee and they face against each other. But a crucial moment happens that we are not told exactly what happened, why, how. We get a couple of different accounts, and I will cover this in more detail in answer to one of the questions I know I've got from one of my patrons later. But the upshot of it is that Kristen Cole falls out with Rhaenyra. He immediately, whatever, we know they met up. We know they had a conversation of some kind, and we know that the very next day he is suddenly on Team Hightower. He is wearing Alicent Hightower's favour in the tourney. He is there letting out huge amounts of anger, it would appear, against Laenor Velaryon's lover when he meets him in the tourney. There's a huge change. Something massive changed. And Rhaenyra marries Laenor. They go off. They have 3 children. It would appear, though, that the 3 children that they have are not actually Laenor's. He's hardly ever there. They do look very suspiciously like Harwin Strong, her new favourite defender from the Kingsguard. He is by her side constantly, and the 3 children look like Strongs. So she, however, has now got male heirs. And so when her father, Viceroys, dies, she naturally assumes that she will be inheriting. But this happens while she is off in Dragonstone, and that's when the coup, and it is a coup, there's no real way of getting around it, the coup by the Hightowers and Kristen Cole to put their person, Aegon, the firstborn son of Alicent Targaryen, the younger brother of Rhaenyra, put him on the throne instead. There starts the Dance of the Dragons. So during the Dance of the Dragons, and that news, it has to be said, that comes to Rhaenyra just as she's late term, about to go into labour with another child. This other child, forgot to mention, she married Damon Targaryen, spoiler alert, and this child then she loses. So we're then faced with being in this civil war. She is on the side of the Blacks against the Greens. She's heading up the Blacks, and the battle, I won't go into the details of all the different battles in the Civil War. It escalates, and almost all of the Targaryens die. Almost all of the dragons die. Effectively, everyone loses in this. But one of the critical moments for Rhaenyra, she spends most of her time on Dragonstone during this. But there comes this moment when she sees her opportunity to take King's Landing. Kristen Cole, Aemond Targaryen, the main bulk of the army from the Greens, has headed out from King's Landing, and she realizes that she can take it. So they swoop in, they take King's Landing, and she's actually welcomed by the people in King's Landing. She was known as the Realm's Delight when she was younger. They kind of like her. But in 6 months, that all changes hugely. They have no money to start with, and there are huge famine, effectively, alongside the brutalities of war. She increasingly starts to focus her anger and her wrath in on a whole range of people she thinks have betrayed her or might betray her. Crucially, the dragon seeds, who are these people who they have got to ride the spare dragons they have, who are presumably, we're left to assume they are all related into the Targaryens in some way, or the Velaryons. They have some Valyrian blood in there. Two of them do turncoat. Two of them do indeed change sides, and this makes her absolutely convinced that the others, that there are two, that Adam Velaryon and also Nettles, they will also. They're not true Targaryens. They're going to betray her, so she just basically puts a warrant out for their arrest. And Nettles, who it appears may well have become Damon Targaryen, her husband's lover, she just says, just kill her. So she is starting to lose grip here hugely. And when one of her effective captives, Helena Targaryen, dies in what could have been a suicide, what could have been a murder, she gets blamed. There are riots, and the situation goes from bad to worse. The riots turn into the attack on the dragon pit. She loses the dragons that they have. She loses another child. And eventually she has to leave King's Landing effectively in disgrace, penniless, with just a few loyal retainers around her. 6 months earlier, she had claimed the Iron Throne for herself. Now she is just desperately trying to make her way back to Dragonstone, and she does finally make it back to Dragonstone, only to find that Aegon II, the person she's been up against all this time, has secretly been there. He's actually taken over Dragonstone in her absence, and he says, you've got to die, and he feeds her to his dragon. And that is the tragic end of Rhaenyra's story. To wrap it all up, there are little bits of legacy we have to be aware of, is that she did reign for 6 months. There's no real doubt. She was in King's Landing. She wore the crown. She sat on the Iron Throne. No one would dispute the fact that she was reigning from King's Landing. But Aegon II said, no, history books will never, ever allow have this. From now on, she's never going to be referred to as Queen Rhaenyra. She's only ever going to be referred to as Princess. She was never queen. He just wrote her out of history. He wrote that bit out of history. That's the first thing. The second thing is that although she did not win, and for her, tragically, huge amounts of things happened. She obviously died in the dance. Her 3 children died in the dance. Her husband died in the dance, having, it would appear, left her. So many people that she loved died. However, both of the 2 sons she had with Damon did become king, and then 2 grandsons from her. The line did carry on through her. So you could argue that despite all of the devastation of the Civil War, actually, ultimately, it was her line, her side, that won. So that's Rhaenyra Targaryen. That's why she is central to all of this. It was the Civil War only happened, the dance only happened because there was a coup against her. She did get to be queen, but had it expunged from history. And ultimately, it was her descendants that ruled on the Iron Throne. So this is her story. It's just, in a very George R. R. Martin way, he has made it very apparent that she has been written out. She has been written out from history. We know who she is, but the fact that she actually became queen is not there. Okay, so let's go to a few. I saw while I was talking, we had a few super chats and the like. Mara Lee, thank you so much for the super sticker. Also, super chat saying a show of love, appreciation, and support for all the fabulous content and stories on both your channels. Hugs to gorgeous Dan, the best dog ever. So thank you very much for that one, Mara. And also had, if I just have a quick check through. Had a question from Marvin Martin saying, was Rhaenyra's later dumb choices a sign of crazy? Well, I mean, if you're a regular viewer here, you know, I think bandying around things like crazy doesn't. I'm not saying you're bandying it around, but I think that the phrase does get bandied around a reasonable amount. It's kind of undermines a lot of the character of what's actually happening there. Rhaenyra was traumatized by what happened. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I think most people were traumatized by what happened. When you think about it, she had the thing that she thought was rightfully hers, rulership, the Iron Throne, was taken away from her. Then she had 3 sons dying. She had people killing her or killing her relatives. She had her husband, it would appear, abandoning her for someone else. Her husband dying. She goes to King's Landing where she is finally gets what she wants, but it turns out that it all turns into ashes around her. She loses, in her mind, she will have lost everything. This is horrific, and I think that we can kind of understand it. And yes, we could say some of the things indeed were not good choices. I absolutely agree with that. Some of them were kind of forced. She might have been able to do slightly better, but the fact that there was no money in the coffers in King's Landing was a huge issue. What are they going to do about that? I'm sure if they had a little bit more time and thought about it, actually all the punitive taxes were probably not a good idea. They probably could have done a little bit more to kind of weed out all of the people who are maybe trying to do them harm behind the scenes in King's Landing. There were things they could have done differently, but we probably shouldn't hold them onto the flames too much for those things. So the question is she going a bit like some of the Targaryens do? Because there is no doubt that whichever language we use, whichever words we use, quite a few of the Targaryens start off being characters that we might be quite sympathetic to. We would include people even like Aerys II, the Mad King, seems to have started out as being actually quite a good and worthy character. Towards the end of his life, quite the opposite. Did she go that way? To a degree, yes, it has to be said. But we have to interpret this all through the prism of what happened to her and the damage that will have done to her. Lord Luke Lightbringer saying, patiently waiting for the winds of winter. Yeah, you and me both. I'm patiently waiting for George R. R. Martin to give us an update. He usually does about this time of the year, not all the time. But he's gone quiet a little bit, so we'll wait and see. But the longer he's quiet, the more writing he's doing. Oh, actually, Roman Lakovet saying, since we didn't even get a New Year's update from George R. R. Martin this time, many fans are obviously frustrated. What would you say to those who think that he has lost his passion for the series? Well, I don't know if he's lost his passion for this. I don't think so. He still seems to get excited by the world that he created, at the very least. Now, whether that means that he's as excited about the story, I think is probably a slightly different matter. You could look at this in a few different ways, just sort of taking a step back. he's clearly taking a long time on this. That's not that's not a huge insight. He took a long time over the last book as well, and then later he kind of said, "Well, I got myself into a bit of a twist, and I had to rewrite some." So it's entirely possible that he's in the same kind of situation, that he's actually had to rewrite some. It's also entirely possible that it's not that he's lost his passion for it, but he's got so passionate about it that it's just a huge sprawling masterpiece. This story, where we're at in A Song of Ice and Fire, we will come back to Rhaenyra in just one moment, but I'm going off on one. This story is at its widest point. The amount of different stories going on that we have to keep a track on is huge right now. It's absolutely enormous. When you just like try and think of the different characters we've got who we can have point of view chapters from, it's just ridiculous. We've got just in Essos, we've got Tyrion, Sir Barristan, we've got Daenerys, we've got Arya, we've got those 4 different things going on. Oh, and Victarion's arrived as well. So just in Essos, we've got 5 different POV characters, and that's not where the main heart of the story is. Then when you get over to Westeros, you've got huge things happening up near the wall. You've got huge things which are going to be happening down near Old Town. We've got a very complicated situation in the Riverlands. And then we've got what's happening in King's Landing. There is so much going on. Oh, I haven't even mentioned Sansa. There is so much going on in that story right now. It will take a huge amount. So in any way of looking at this, we're not actually waiting for one book. In terms of size, this is going to be the size of 2, 3, maybe even 4 normal sized books. There is no way this is coming in at anything less than the biggest book of the series so far. So this is going to be huge. I don't see any sign from what he's been writing on his blog when he does mention it that he's got any less excited by it. He seems very excited by the TV adaptations. If I had to say what is going on, he does seem to be getting slightly more distracted or sidelined by his other projects, or more sidelined by them than he perhaps was suggesting he was going to be a couple of years ago. He's got a railway line and various other things that he's excited about, and editing wildcards and things like that. But a digression. He is writing it. I remain positive that he's still excited by this series. I cannot wait for the next update. I think that's really all we can say. It's when I was talking to James Hancock last week, I regurgitated the Neil Gaiman quote, which I think is well worth saying every time. Well, my brain goes down. It's worth saying to myself every time. It is that George R.R. Martin is not your bitch. George R.R. Martin does not owe me a book. He does not owe you a book. He doesn't owe anyone. He's an artist. He can create art as and when he wants to. I want him to. I am allowed to want him to write it, but I have no ownership of that. Lady Pushkins, thank you so much, saying, what character in Fire and Blood could you see Henry Cavill playing? Not thinking about it, just wondering. What character could he play? I don't know. See, the thing is, I don't know. Well, this is a really, really interesting question. I mean, I would, before he played Geralt, I would have said, well, he couldn't really do the sort of the long white blonde hair, but he's obviously shown that you can. I do wonder whether he would have made a good Kristen Cole. I can't remember who they've got in for that. I'm sure they're excellent, whoever they are, but that's the kind of character that I could see him doing really well as. Yeah, there are a lot of them. I don't personally see him as a Targaryen. That's not really where I see him. Maybe a Strong, maybe Harwin Strong or someone like that. He certainly got the bulk for it. Mark Sheeser suggesting Cregan Stark. Yeah, maybe. I can see what you mean. I don't personally. I think Cregan Stark I find more big and bushy bearded, but maybe that's just me. And Dr. Debunk suggesting break bones. Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Weirwood saying sexy Valerian. Maybe Bitter Steel suggests Mitchellanius. Yeah, that's a little bit later. And yeah, Andrew Kay, I agree. He's a Baratheon, perhaps. I think he could definitely work that. A Strong or a Baratheon. He's for the just for the physique. And a few people suggesting Dunk. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, keep those thoughts going. I think that's me caught up on the super chats now. So Andrew K, just picking up a couple of random questions and points in the chat. Andrew K saying, I'm hoping that George R. R. Martin will do as he did with The Dance with Dragons after Game of Thrones season 1. He may do the same with The Winds of Winter after House of the Dragon season 1, if not 2022. No idea when it will come out. Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful for 2022, but I'm long past predicting now. I used to predict. I'm long past predicting when it's going to be coming out. Ariel Winchester saying, hey, Robert. Hey there. Rhaenyra is probably one of my favourite Targaryen women next to Daenerys. In my opinion, since her father named her his heir and wouldn't budge when Aegon was born, she was the rightful heir to the throne. What's your opinion on this? If you were there, which side would you choose, the Greens or the Blacks? Well, yes, I mean, short answer is yes, I agree that she was the named heir. And I think the argument that the Greens went with, which was that there was a precedent set in the Great Council when Viceroys was chosen, and they decided to overlook the claims of a female claimant and then go to, or the idea that it might go through the female line and instead just say this has to go through the male line and it has to be a male inheritor. That, I think, for me, I can understand it, but the Great Council got its authority from Jaehaerys as king, and Jaehaerys said that he would agree to what they said. That's because this is an absolute monarchy. It is not a democracy or a republic or anything like that. The person who is in charge is the king, the ruler, the monarch. And when Viserys became king, Viserys got to decide who his heir would be, and he got to decide what the laws of the land should be, and he got to decide whether the Great Council established a precedent or not, and he decided it did not establish a precedent. He was going to say that his firstborn daughter was the heir, and that was that. And then the Lords of the Realm, as I mentioned in my summary at the beginning, they did all swear fealty, support for her as the heir. So it was them going against what they had already sworn. So yes, she was the rightful heir. The other argument that the Greens had, which was that Rhaenyra's children were not legitimate children. They were not of the Targaryen line. They were probably born not of Laenor Velaryon, but of Harwin Strong. Then that actually isn't really that relevant. If I attempt to put a lawyerly hat on, hashtag I am not a lawyer, but because you're not arguing about who's going to be monarch after Rhaenyra, you're arguing about whether Rhaenyra should be monarch. And if you decide that she should be, then it's up to her then as the new monarch to decide who's going to be following. So I don't think that argument holds water either. The fact is that the coup happened because A, Otto Hightower absolutely hated Damon Targaryen. B, Kristen Cole absolutely hated or turned against Rhaenyra, and C, Alicent wanted her children to be on the Iron Throne. Those were the reasons why. It wasn't for any other greater, nobler principle of succession that was established. And I think most people kind of understood that. So which side would I have chosen? Well, I on the grounds of what I've just said, then obviously I think that the blacks are in the right on this one. But I would probably just clarify to say that I suspect I would have wished to be a neutral maester or something like that in this. The point of the Dance of the Dragons is that everybody lost. You don't want to be on either side, particularly small folk like us. We would not have fared well in this. Okay. Andrew Kay saying Rhaenyra's children were blatantly illegitimate, though Robert is correct. The debate is if Rhaenyra should be the monarch, not her potential succession issues. And Reflective Rambling saying Robert may not be a lawyer in a Song of Ice and Fire fandom, but you should know who is Maesters Merry and Clint. For lore and Westeros content, visit westerosbar.org. I highly recommend that you do. They've got I've got a YouTube as well, I think, Westerosi Bar Association. Absolutely. So just flicking through, saying Krieger Damarung saying the High Lords actually wanted the rules to be vague and flexible. That gave them more power to impose their agenda. Yes, absolutely true. There was indeed an argument after the High Council, the Great Council, about whether a precedent was set for all time or not, and that clearly shows that that this was not written into some great Magna Carta law that was held up. This was just a thing that some people wished to claim as being the law now. What is going on now? Okay, so let's go to another question from 444. Thank you very much for the help on your name. It's saying, regarding Rhaenyra, my impression is that she started as someone similar to Daenerys, likable character who knows how to find supporters and outmaneuver her foes, but she ended up more like Cersei in A Feast for Crows, making mistake after another mistake, who was hated and or abandoned by almost everyone. What was the turning point for her? Do you think Rhaenyra's storyline can in some way be foreshadowing what will happen to Daenerys or Cersei in The Winds of Winter or A Dream of Spring? Okay, I think this is really insightful. I think that the Realm's Delight, which is the first version of Rhaenyra, yes, she does definitely seems to have been charming, and people did seem to love her for who she is. And can we see some of Daenerys there? I think we probably can. In terms of where she ends up, is it like Cersei? Yes, I think definitely. I've said this before, but in case you've not heard me setting this out, I think that the scene is set very strongly for an echo of this story, the story of Rhaenyra effectively being hounded out of King's Landing or having to leave, having completely seen the city collapsing around her ears. I think that this will get echoed in Cersei's story. There are quite a lot of similarities going on. First of all, this huge war that's been raging for quite a while, which is leading to shortages. It's also leading to them having no money. And we see that the epilogue to A Dance with Dragons, if you want a fascinating read, do go back to that, because that sets up so much of what we're going to be seeing in King's Landing in the next book. In there, it's very clear that the money has run out. And Kevin Lannister at the time, he's basically in charge and is basically saying, well, we don't want to be raising the taxes because the people will start to turn against us. But Cersei is clearly grumbling away in the background going, oh, well, we should probably do that. Next book, Cersei's going to be in charge. Kevin gets assassinated. So she's going to be in charge, and what's she going to do? Well, she's already said it. She's going to raise taxes on people. People will not like it. So they are going to start grumbling and turning against her. Plus all the shortages that there are already is going to cause a huge issue. Then we start getting some of the echoes that are definitely there, that happened on the show and probably will happen in the books. The first one being the storming of the dragon pit. So you get the destruction of the dragon pit. That's what happened under Rhaenyra. What happens under Cersei? The destruction of the great sept of Baelor. We get there are 3. King's Landing is based on 3 hills. You get the dragon pit on one of them, the great sept on another, and the red keep on the third. And it's the same thing that was happening. Is you will have had Rhaenyra looking out, seeing the destruction and the smoke coming up from the dragon pit. Is the same idea as Cersei when she sees the destruction on the other hill of the great sept. That is one echo that we see there. Another is Helaena, Queen Helaena, who falls out of a window in the Red Keep in Maegor's Holdfast and dies. And this may have been suicide. That clearly echoes across to Tommen's suicide on the show. Is that going to happen in the books? It's possible, particularly when you think that Helena's suicide might not have been suicide, that might have been murder. Tommen's in the books might not be suicide, that might also be murder. There are people heading there, the Sand Snakes, for example, who are heading there with quite an agenda against the Lannisters. So we have got echoes going on, and there is an alternative coming, which is Fagon, who is going to be, he's only 2 weeks ride down the road already, down in Storm's End, and he is going to be coming to the gates of King's Landing, and the people will want to get rid of Cersei because Cersei will have raised taxes. She will. This is perhaps it's going to be like a 6 months of her being in charge, as was there with Rhaenyra. She'll be raising taxes. People will be starving. There'll be a riot. The great sept will get destroyed. People will turn on her. They will see an alternative. They will try to raise up that alternative who will be hugely popular. I see this huge echo happening there. And so, yeah, I think that's the key bit of echoing that's happening. Reflective Rambling just in the chat saying, do we know who started the rumours that Rhaenyra murdered her? Is it possible that it was murder but set up by Blacks to frame her? Well, yes. So what we find is that, yeah, the rumours went out. There was a riot following Helena's death based on the rumour that Rhaenyra had ordered the death of Helaena. She probably didn't. She had no real reason to do that. And if she did want to kill her, why on earth would she do it in such a public way? She could just make her disappear. So it doesn't make any sense that it was Rhaenyra. But who started the rumours? Well, we have a whole load of people there. When she gets into King's Landing, they can't get rid of all of the people who were there beforehand, all the people who have been pulling the strings behind the scenes, and in particular the person that we have to be looking for is Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, who is effectively Master of Whisperers for Aegon II, and he disappears for huge amounts of this story. And if you imagine him as being a bit like this Varys figure, scurrying around all the tunnels, he seemed to have known all the tunnels in the Red Keep, the hidden tunnels. He is exactly the kind of person who may have then just decided, you know what, let's get rid of Rhaenyra. This is not working. We need to get rid of her. We can bring in some other people, because there were other armies on the way. First of all, you had the Baratheons, again, another echo, who comes in afterwards, an army coming up from Storm's End. So there is a clear thing. If I had to guess who it was, I think he would be my prime suspect. Caius Ballerina saying, did someone start a false rumor about a Targaryen? Was Littlefinger alive back then? No, but there are plenty of people who had it in for various different Targaryens at the time. Mara Lee, Mara, thank you so much. Love to see you in the chat, saying, love the stories on The Well Told Tale, as well as all the fabulous merch, especially my Kraken Tacos t-shirt. Excellent. Well, if you want a Kraken Tacos t-shirt for yourself, somewhere down there should be a link to that kind of thing. And Divine Chereka, hi there. Just a quick shout out to you. So question, the rest of this from 444, what was the turning point for Rhaenyra and her story? I don't know if we can call it a turning point, but I think Damon Targaryen is probably behind huge amounts of the things that go wrong in her life all the way through. He seems to have been seeing her as a means to an end a huge amount of the time. That doesn't mean that he didn't have any feelings for her. He may well have done, but he certainly saw her as a route to get closer to the throne and closer to power again and again and again. And this is not a good influence on her. But in terms of what broke her as a person, I suspect it was having the throne taken away from her by her stepbrother and losing a child at the same time, followed very swiftly afterwards by losing another child in the first action of the Civil War, when both sides sent emissaries down to Storm's End. She lost a son there as well. That was the moment that it became personal for her. So there, if you were looking for a turning point, it's there at the beginning. I think what happened afterwards was just building on that initial shock and horror and despair, really. Tom Tretter saying, always wanted one of my questions answered. Well, I'll give it a go. Can you talk about how, if Jacaerys had taken the throne after Rhaenyra, House Velaryon would be the new royal house? Well, so this is an interesting one. So, yet, if Rhaenyra had married into House Velaryon, but her royal standard remained, it was quartered, and 2 of the quarters were Targaryen. So she may well have been technically married into House Velaryon, but she considered herself very much Targaryen. Now, her 3 sons from Rhaenyra Targaryen, they were they were Velaryons. Does that mean that this would be House Velaryon taking over? Theoretically, yes, but when people become king, they sort of that's the point at which they decide what name they might wish to take for themselves. So they may well have just kept on with the Targaryen thing and just brought the Velaryons into the Targaryen family as a whole. So it's not clear. Yes, if it all went sort of all by technicality, then yes, probably this would then be the start of a new House Velaryon. But that may well not have been in practice what they ended up doing. let's have a quick quick look through. I think right. I think I'm probably caught up now on the chat. So let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Regarding Rhaenyra's marriage with Damon, how much of it do you think was out of love and how much was out of political convenience?" Thank you. Okay, so let's dig into this relationship between Rhaenyra and Damon. So to start with, there didn't seem to be much when she was very young. There didn't seem to be much of a relationship there. He considered himself to be the heir, regardless. He only really seemed to start paying attention to her when she was named heir, and particularly once once Alicent had sons, because that meant that Damon's claim to the throne, which was based upon the fact that he was the closest male heir, no longer held water. He was then bumped down regardless, bumped down the line of succession. So if he was to power, the way for him to do this was to get close to Rhaenyra. Now, there is a rumor that we had in which it's never spelled out. It's almost a throwaway comment. Well, the first time he's kind of gets thrown out from King's Landing, I think actually the second time is because he allegedly deflowered Rhaenyra. He had spent a huge amount of time when she was 16. He was in his 30s or something like that. He spent a lot of time with her, telling her tales of his wonderful adventures, teaching her how to go hawking, things like that. So there was an argument, we're not told the substance of the argument, between Viserys and Damon, which led to Damon being thrown out effectively. Now, when they married, this was done in secret. And the reason it was done in secret was quite clearly because Viserys would have objected. Viserys would not want his brother to be marrying his daughter. Now, what was in it for Rhaenyra? Did it bolster her claim in any way? No. It wasn't a politically advantageous marriage for her. Did it gain any extra allies? No, not really. Just him, and he was, in and of himself, he was a redoubtable figure. He had a dragon, but it wasn't, he wasn't bringing armies with him. What about any other reason? Well, there's no other real reason than she wanted to. She loved him. She was obsessed with him. Something along those lines. That would be why she would. Why would he? Well, this was hugely advantageous for him. He got kicked out from his position of authority in King's Landing. He had then managed to get himself married to Rhaenyra Velaryon, but then that was Laenor's sister. Now, this is where it gets complicated, because at various moments in time, he was her uncle, her brother-in-law, then her husband. But after she died, there were then a couple of mysterious accidents that happened, because the next person to die was Laenor Velaryon, who was her husband. Now, how did he die? Well, he died. His lover killed him in an argument, apparently. The rumor was that maybe Damon had paid him to do that. Okay, maybe that was just a coincidence. But then we get a mysterious fire at Harrenhal, the home seat of House Strong, at a time when both Lionel Strong, who had randomly a little while earlier actually called for Damon to be executed, and also Harwin Strong, who was Rhaenyra's lover. So in the space of a few months, we get Damon's wife dies, Rhaenyra's husband dies, and Rhaenyra's lover dies. Those were the three things which were preventing the two of them getting together. And in at least two of those three deaths, Damon, he looks a bit suspicious, it has to be said. So, was it politically advantageous for him? Yes, absolutely 100%. He was on a downward spiral, it has to be said. He kept on trying to pull himself back up, and sometimes he did quite clever ploys, like he won the Stepstones on this huge epic invasion that he did with Corlys Velaryon. He won them, got himself crowned king of the Stepstones, and then went back to his brother and laid the crown down before him and said, "This is yours, not mine." Some great things just to kind of wheedle his way back into power. But he had lost a huge amount. He'd moved hugely down the pecking order in terms of inheritance of the throne, and this was his one shot. So, to bring back to the question from Diego, how much of that marriage was love? How much of it was political convenience? I would say love on Rhaenyra's part, probably. I can't see of any other particular reason why she might want to, other than the fact that she wanted to marry him. On his part, maybe there was love, but he doesn't seem to show it much, if it is there. Political convenience, that's one way of putting it. Personally, I would say almost political desperation. This was, as far as he's concerned, a bit of a necessity. Okay. Meltor Mash, thank you very much indeed for the super sticker. Thomas the Kirschmacher saying, makes me think we barely ever see real dogs in A Song of Ice and Fire. I can only think of Clegane's dogs and Ramsay's hounds. Yeah, there are other dogs. There's the wonderfully named dog called Dog, of course, that Septon Merribold has. So they are there, but they are, as they were at the time, as much as anything else, they are service animals. So they are used for the hunt and things like that, rather than what we have modern times where we have them as pets. So yes, dogs are very much a part of the world, but not in the same way that they are in ours. Matt Savino saying it's a good thing that a lot of the book is left open to interpretation, as the show can go many different directions. So yes, this is a Fire and Blood issue, and it's one of the things I'm most looking forward to is the fact that Fire and Blood is written from a historian's perspective, from the Maester's perspective. And there are gaps in knowledge, as of course there will have been. Some things happen in rooms that people weren't in. So you just have to guess at what happened. And now, often what happens in Fire and Blood is we get the writer saying, and Septon Eustace says such and such happened. And then Mushroom says such and such happened. I think it's much more likely that Mushroom's wrong on this occasion, something along those lines. But it's not ever stated objectively what the truth is. So I will find it fascinating how they approach this on the TV show, the extent to which they do toe this path of leaving it up to the viewer to decide. And the first big call on this will be this moment, which I think we'll be talking about in just a moment, actually, which is with what happened with Kristen Cole and Rhaenyra and Damon, because that no one was there. No one knows for sure, and there are different accounts, and you have to. The TV show could do exactly what the book does, and just sort of like pan out. Door closes. We'll see what happens afterwards. A lot of TV shows do that. And incidentally, I watched ages ago where I watched the first season of The Crown, and they did this huge amounts. If you ever go back and watch this, I don't know why. It was clearly a directorial decision, but a lot of the actual conversations they just cut away from, and then we saw the result of the conversation, and that still flowed well. So it is possible to do if you're a good good screenwriter, you can, and a good director, you can deliver something which does allow that uncertainty. So they may do that, or they may on some of these to show what happened and just pick one or another. Question from Lady Pushkin saying, hello Robert, happy new year to you and to you. I think we're all ready for a fresh start. Absolutely. Anyway, do you think there is anything in the tales that the Iron Throne cuts those who are not meant to or worthy to sit upon it? I feel for Rhaenyra. Her father made a decision, but the hunger for power ultimately cost her. So this is a really interesting. I don't know whether it counts as a theory. It's something that's actually built into the world as that George R. R. Martin has created as something that people talk about. And what I mean by that is that theory that the Iron Throne cuts those who are not worthy for it is mentioned in Fire and Blood. Septon Eustace, this is the link across here with Rhaenyra, is that when Rhaenyra first arrived at King's Landing, she sits on the Iron Throne, and we're told that despite the fact that she was in full plate armor, the people who were there could still see that she was dripping blood because the Iron Throne was jamming at her. And this was, people said, is this the Iron Throne saying that she is not worthy to sit on it? I think we have to look at that, particularly with people like Septon Eustace, to see what's the agenda there. Are they trying to show their loyalty by sort of retrospectively adding in a few details to make the story work better from the side that they're wanting to impress? I suspect that was what was happening there. But the bigger point about what happens with the Iron Throne, it wasn't just Rhaenyra. We get several occurrences of this happening. Now, Aerys II, the Mad King, we're told towards the end of his reign, he got so many cuts and scratches from it, he started to be called King Scab, because he had scabs all over his arms and legs from sitting on the Iron Throne where we were scratching him. We get, rather more dramatically than that, you get Maegor the Cruel, who is killed by the Iron Throne, by which he goes into the throne room, and then he's discovered the next morning impaled on it, for want of a better word, and very much dead. Now, probably somebody just pushed him into the swords, but that's, we don't know. And obviously this adds to the possibility, is it the throne itself killing him? We also get another random example is Aegon the Conqueror, when he heard, when he got that letter from Prince Nymor, if you remember, all the way back to the attacks on Dorne, and then his sister dies, Rhaenys, she gets shot down, and then after huge amounts of retribution from Dorne, we get Prince Nymor inherits from his mother and basically sues for peace, and he sends his daughter there with this letter, hands it to Aegon, and Aegon reads it. Afterwards he declares peace. He says, "We will have peace with Dawn from now on." And we don't know what was in the letter, but we do hear that he gripped the Iron Throne so tightly that blood started dripping from his hand. That is another example. There are, I think there are another couple of examples, but are these just bad people? Is this the Iron Throne rejecting those who are not worthy? I don't think so, because this is, as I say, Aegon did bleed from it as well. I suspect that Maegor was killed by a person, not a throne. And the idea of getting scratches, the Rhaenyra ones, that sounds almost like a bit of propaganda after the time. But is it possible that the Iron Throne is sort of making moral judgments about who sits on it? I don't personally think it's likely. That seems more like an in-universe story that is used to justify whether somebody should or shouldn't be sitting on the Iron Throne. There is a more boring, or boring is probably mundane, sort of response to this, which we can use, which is the Iron Throne. And I think Ned thinks about this in book one, might be someone else, but the Iron Throne is designed, has got a very specific design. And yes, this is the swords of the conquered foes of Aegon the Conqueror. This is to show the might and strength of the Targaryens. It is to awe people who come in there, seeing this king sat high up on this throne made from swords from all of his conquered victims. But also the thought that I think Ned has is that this is a seat that is definitely uncomfortable, but you have to sit alert on it at all times. You have to be engaged with what is going on. You have to sit actively in it. If you slouch, if you are not paying much attention, if you're drunk, if you're tired, that is when, or you're angry, that is when you might cut yourself on it. You have to be clear-headed, you have to be focused and engaged in what you're supposed to be doing. If you are, you probably won't get cut, because you can concentrate on what's going on. You won't, yes, that it's jaggedy, but you can see where the swords are. It's only when you're doing one of the kind of things, that's when the problems come. So I think I probably go with that. I probably go with a slightly more mundane one. As much as for the fact also that, can you write a list of who the good Targaryens are and the bad Targaryens are, and who should get cut by it and who shouldn't? It's very hard to write that list. And when you do write that list, it's very hard to match it up to the different people who were cut by it and the people who were not cut by it. Let's Andrew K saying maybe it was a paper cut. The letter did it to Aegon the First. Maybe no. I don't think you think that either. I think it was. I think this was clearly trying to show, the way it was described, it was clearly trying to show whatever was in the letter made him angry, which is what adds to the mystery of the letter, is that this clearly made him angry, but at the same time, whatever he'd been told by Dawn, but at the same time, within 24 hours, he was willing to just forgive them. So this was well, I'm not going. I've talked about that in a full video if you're interested. I think it's reasonably clear. We're never told what's in there, so we can never be 100% certain, but I think it's reasonably clear roughly what it must have said to get the result that we got, the response that we get from Aegon. Canadian Fantasy Corner saying, got to go, had fun, enjoyed the tea. Got to go on marketing my own channel and then reading Conan. That sounds an excellent thing. Well, I'll help you market it. Always happy to help. Canadian Fantasy Corner YouTube channel. Go and check it out. So there you go. A quick shout out for you. And Shannon Adams saying, great topic. So looking forward to House of the Dragon. There are wildly varying accounts of the relationship between Kristen Cole and Rhaenyra before her marriage to Laenor Velaryon. Whose accounts do you consider the most reliable? What is your headcanon? Okay, so I said we would get onto this. So let's do this. Kristen Cole was a member of the Kingsguard, and Rhaenyra, as a child, she asked for him to be her personal guard, and Viserys happily allowed that, and they became near inseparable. Now, what happened then this is over the course of several years. What we know happened in public was that he then became absolutely devoted to her. He wore her favor in tourneys. He was not just her sort of personal bodyguard, he was very much her champion as well. That was clearly what was going on there, and from the public perception. But as she grew older, then what might have happened with this relationship? Might this have turned into a crush from one direction or the other, or both ways? We don't know. But Mushrooms got all manner of lurid accusations about what may or may not have happened. There are also other accusations. Did they have an affair? What we know is this all came to a head the night before she was due to be married to Laenor Velaryon. Now, we know that Laenor Velaryon, she didn't love him. We know that he was gay, so clearly she didn't really see the point in marrying him either, but Viserys insisted, and to the point where he said, do you want to be heir to the throne? You got to marry this guy. And so she seems to have accepted that. But then he went to her room, or perhaps they went somewhere else, and they had a conversation, he being Kristen Cole. What happened in that room? Well, we do not know what happened in that room. We get differing accounts. Maybe he tried to seduce her. Maybe she tried to seduce him. Did one or other of them suggest running off? I think the fact that both of these accounts that we get, the Septon Eustace and the Mushroom account, seem to suggest whoever they say initiated this, clearly one or other of them, the implication is one or other of them was wanting the two of them to get together, to forget this marriage and to head off together. The question is, who was it? Now, given the fact that Rhaenyra ended up marrying Laenor and seemingly moving on to another lover relatively swiftly, suggests that it's not her that was heartbroken, is clue number one. Clue number two is that Kristen Cole suddenly got absolutely vehemently anti-Rhaenyra. He wore the favor of her arch rival at the tourney that followed. He beat the brains out of Laenor, her husband's lover. He was angry, and a bit later he was part of the driving force. He pushed the coup over the edge. It would probably not have happened. If you read the account of what happened in the Green Council, it probably would not have happened but for him. So of the two, who seems to be the spurned one here? It seems to be Kristen Cole. it doesn't seem to be Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra, it would appear from her later actions, was probably actually in love, if she was in love with anyone, with Damon Targaryen. Kristen Cole, however, maybe, if we have to go with Occam's razor on this, we can't be sure on it, etc., etc., but Occam's razor suggests the most likely thing is that he went to her, tried to persuade her out of what would be a loveless marriage, and said, we've got this bond. He poured out his heart to her. This is the last chance. She's going to be a married woman tomorrow. They can run off. They can go to the free cities, something along those lines. And she just gave him some home truths. Yes, I like you a lot, but I'm marrying this guy regardless. I'm not going to give up my claim to the throne. I'm sorry. I know that we spent huge amounts of time with each other, but this isn't going to work. And maybe she even went as far as sort of like laughing at the very idea that she might run off with him. Maybe she said, if that's the way you feel, then I can't have you as my close companion anymore. We don't know, but he very, very likely was a spurned lover. Whether they were actually lovers or not, I think doesn't matter. I think the point is that he wanted something and she just shut him down and said no. So that seems to me the most likely explanation. Osama Cameron saying, hi Robert, do you know about Wizards and Warriors channel? They do great videos about battles, about Lord of the Rings battles. Perhaps you could do a reaction. Yeah, I don't know the channel. I don't tend to do reaction videos, but I'll go and check it out. Thank you very much. Thomas the Kirschmacher saying, without potentially a mushroom at Rhaenyra's court, who will give us some humoristic scenes in House of the Dragon? I can't think of a Tyrion, Tormund, or Ed in Fire and Blood. Yeah, so the tone of Fire and Blood is going to be interesting. They have not announced Mushroom, and this is a character I desperately want Mushroom in there. Mushroom's such an amazing character. I really, really, really want to have Mushroom, but we've not had an announcement. We've not had an announcement on much of the cast, to be honest. So I don't think that means that we're not going to have him. But the tone, as a broader issue, the tone of this might not be like Game of Thrones. They want to stick closely to the formula that they know works, so it's not going to be completely different. They've obviously got the same composer in again, which undoubtedly is good news. But George R. R. Martin, who has been very much in favor of this, he seems to have been very involved along the line. He says that he has seen a first cut of episode 1. I would call it the pilot, but they've greenlit and almost filmed the entire season, so there's no pilot going on here. He says he's seen a first cut of episode 1, and I can't remember the exact word that he used, but he basically, it was dark. It was the impression that he was giving us. It was sort of dark and moody, exactly how he likes his fantasy. It's like, if you remember the trailer, it started off black figures carrying torches through the darkness, moody music, Matt Smith talking over the top in his sort of very slowest, darkest, moodiest voice. That's the kind of skull of a dragon. That's the kind of thing that we're looking at here. This is probably going to be a lot darker and bleaker. So is it going to have a humoristic character, as you say? I'm sure they will probably inject some humor in there, but I don't think we're going to have as much humor as on the main Game of Thrones series. So Andrew Case saying, I think next month, perhaps the trailer. I expect episode 1 in April or May. Yeah, so I will talk very quickly about the timing on this. I would recommend, if you want the detailed working through on this. I happened to see about a month ago, I think, the Dragon Demands did a video on this for the timing of House of the Dragon, which was very good, I thought, in terms of trying to work out when this might happen. There are actually a lot of constraints, is the short answer. Go to that video if you want the detail of this. I'll recount not just what that says on that video, but from the general information I've been picking up. This is going to be a 10-week series. This is going to be, although other TV shows at the moment, they seem to be going into we'll drop the first 2 or 3 episodes in week 1, and then we'll do the rest on a weekly thing afterwards, or Netflix dropping it all at the same time as they did with The Witcher. HBO still seem to be sticking to weekly. 10 episodes, 10 weeks. So this is a long series we've got going on here. This is 2.5 months. This is a long series that has to be fitted in. Now, there are a few constricting factors in that. The first is the fact that they are still filming. At least we haven't had any filming updates. We've certainly not had a tweet going out saying, and that's a wrap, or something along those lines, which we almost always do with these kind of TV shows, just to show that progress is being made. So we did have Matt Smith talked a while ago about shooting through to January, so they're probably nearly done, but they're still filming now. If they're still filming now, with the best will in the world, I don't think they're going to get this out in the next 2 to 3 months. This is going to be a high CGI kind of TV show, 10 episodes worth. They will have to have some dragons in there somewhere. This is going to take a reasonable amount of post-production time. Now, if you look at what other TV shows at the moment are running with, COVID has made all of these things a little bit harder, take a bit more time to do a lot of these things. This hasn't been hit as much as some productions, it has to be said, by COVID, but still, COVID has made things a lot harder for everybody. You're looking at the moment for things like The Witcher, The Wheel of Time. They were coming in at 5, 6, 7 months of post-production. The Lord of the Rings TV show is 13 months. I think that's an outlier. I think at the moment we're looking at somewhere in the region of 5, 6, 7 months for this kind of TV show for post-production. They could potentially squeeze it in a little bit more if they desperately want to, I guess. So I don't think we're looking, personally, I don't think we're looking at March. They could try to go for April. They might want to go for April because that is the cutoff for getting things in for, I think it's the Emmys, maybe one of the award seasons that the year begins and ends around there, and you have to have launched it in April in order to hit 1 year, or you're in the next year. And they may wish to try and get it in this year. So it's possible that we may get it in April. After that, actually, the big issue that we're going to have is Lord of the Rings. There is no way that they will want to be having House of the Dragon on at the same time as Lord of the Rings, because this is their big thing for HBO. This is the biggest ever program that they had, the biggest ever program there has been, Game of Thrones. This is their follow-on to that. They want to have all of the coverage in all of the major Entertainment Weekly. They want to be on all of the TV chat shows. They want to be everywhere. They want people talking about this. They want people excited about this. They do not want it diluted by Amazon, who will be throwing absolutely everything at their biggest thing ever, the highest budget TV show of all time. It's not going to happen at the same time. Which means that, given that Lord of the Rings is going to be happening September the 2nd, and That we don't know exactly how they're going to be doing that, but that's 8 episodes. So we're looking at that being September, October. And that basically, I think, leaves either after that, so October running up to Christmas, which is possible, but it's a long way away, or that bit June through to about September. Now, if I were a betting man, I'm not, but that seems the most likely. But yeah, certainly not before April. As far as I can see, I can't see how they, if they're still filming now, I certainly can't see how they could get that done before April. April seems a huge push. June seems quite likely as a second favourite after that, then October, November. So that's where we are in terms of filming. Sorry, I went on for slightly longer than I was expecting, but there's a lot of little bits of information there that you have to just try and fit into an overall plan. The other thing that HBO have got coming out, of course, is Westworld season 4, which won't be as big by any means, but I suspect they'll want to keep the two of them separate. Joke and Hagar, enjoy your dinner. Reflective Rambling saying, would it be better for Amazon or HBO to be first, later for clearer memory, come awards or holiday purchasing season, or earlier to maybe still over hype? Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one, and I think it's a matter of when it's going to be ready. Wesley Mons saying Game of Thrones always wrapped up in December and had a season out by April, and that was the biggest show in the world, so it's not unheard of. No, that's right, but that was seasons 1 to 6. What you'll find is that when you got to the big dragons in seasons 7 and 8, their post-production time increased. As I say, it's possible if they're still filming now, which is what we hear, then that's a month later than the Game of Thrones annual turnaround anyway, and the CGI demands will be higher. So April seems just possible, but it would be very, very tight. It's more likely later, is my take. Lady Pushkin asking, do you think George R.R. Martin will release the book on a date that is significant to himself? I mean, I don't know. I do wonder that the interaction, this is something we do not know, the interaction between him, his editor, and the publishers. The feeling from the outside that I get is that then they're not going to rush him. They're not going to try and threaten the fact that they have to get this book. This is going to be massive, this book, not just in size, but in terms of numbers of sales. Particularly if it gets released. If you imagine if it were released as 2 or even 3 books at the same time, I would buy all 3, and I suspect most people watching this would buy all 3 as well. That is not just a small payday for a publisher, that is a massive payday for a publisher, and this is going to be the publishing event of the year whenever it happens. I think they're not going to push him. They're going to let him finish it at his own speed, but the moment it's ready, that's the point at which the publishers will take over, and I think then they will make a decision about how quickly can they get it out. My understanding is 3 months for something this size. They have to book advertising slots, as well as all of the obvious things like print runs and copy editing and translations and the audiobook narration. There's a gazillion things that are going to have to happen once it's actually finished. To get all of that out and running, 3 months seems like about as fast as they can do for that. But I think that the publishers will make a decision, at least partly based on the fact that this is going to be the biggest payday of their year, and they want to get it right, and they will want to line it up with what works. And I suspect, ideally for them, it will be November. But in time for sort of Christmas sales and the like, but they will want to pitch it at the right moment, and if that means holding it back for a month in order to make it land at the right, at the right time, I think they will definitely do that. Tom Tretter saying, praying for an April release. I wonder if they were planning to release a trailer at the convention in Vegas. Yeah, that was my theory as well. The trailer, the Vegas. This was an official Game of Thrones convention. This was an HBO Game of Thrones convention, not a fan run one. There are various other fan run conventions, but this was an official one, and it always, to me, the timing felt like they would do something House of the Dragon-y with this. The fact that they did one or decided to do one in the first place was very much a matter of, we'll try and get the fans back on side. The hardcore fans who maybe were a bit disillusioned after Game of Thrones Season 8, we'll try to get them back on side, give them a whole load of love and good things. And February is an odd time for a convention. Most conventions are generally more in the summer months, but this would have been in February. Why then? Before the House of the Dragon happened, my guess when I heard it announced was that it was going to be a teaser trailer, and maybe they would get a few of the cast members along from there to sort of mingle with the fans and things like that, because if filming was carrying on until January, maybe they would be able to get a few of the cast members along after filming finished. So that was my guess. Yeah, I think that seems likely, but now that's not happening. Anyone's guess. Mark Sheesa saying, out of the two series, I worry more about the Amazon one. I think I'm hoping both will be good, obviously. And Andrew Kay saying, the appetite for a Tolkien universe adaptation will make the Amazon series stratospheric in popularity. House of the Dragon should stay well clear of it. Yeah, absolutely. I think we are going to see the two biggest TV shows of the year in House of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings. That was certainly on IMDb when they did their list of the most anticipated. Did a poll, apparently most anticipated shows of the year. Number 1 was House of the Dragon. Number 2 is the Lord of the Rings show. I personally think that's probably that they could have switched them the other way around if we'd had any information out from the Lord of the Rings other than one still shot. If they'd even told us the name of the Lord of the Rings show, perhaps there would be a bit more hype about that. But that's by the by. I think these are definitely going to be the two biggest things, and I think Amazon just put the flag in the ground and said, this was last year, they said September the 2nd. That's our thing. Everyone can arrange themselves around us. We're not budging. Terra Incognita saying, Robert has done more to build my hype for House of the Dragon than anything in their advertising budget. Well, feel free to tell them that. Thank you very much. I don't tend to see myself as a hype merchant, but I hope that my enthusiasm is infectious to some degree, at least. Okay, so let's go to a question from Shannon Adams, saying, if Viserys had allowed Damon and Rhaenyra to marry, would the realm have fared better than the decimation of the Dance of the Dragons? Well, so I assume you mean, so they obviously did marry later on, but if you're talking earlier, this was the rumor of why there was one of those arguments between Viserys and Damon that led to Damon being chucked out. Yes, maybe he slept with her, but also maybe he was wanting to marry her. What if Damon had said yes? Would the realm have fared better? I don't think it would have made any difference, is my take on that. What we have is the reasons that I gave a little bit ago, actually, about why the real reasons why the High Towers staged a coup. It wasn't about whether, who her children were. If she had had a whole raft of beautiful Valyrian children with Damon, and would that have changed the equation? Well, that would have meant that the High Towers, the Greens, wouldn't have been able to go through their list of things and say, well, I don't think that these children are legitimate children. They might not have been able to do that. But still, the reasons why they wouldn't have wanted Rhaenyra on the throne would have been there. Otto Hightower would still not have wanted Damon to be anywhere near the throne. Kristen Cole would still not have wanted Rhaenyra anywhere near the throne, and Alicent would still have wanted her children to be on the throne. So the reasons would still have been there. The Greens and the Blacks probably would have still got into two parties. The Rhaenyra would probably have headed over to Dragonstone. The only difference I could see is that rather than having a rather absent father in Laenor Velaryon, we would have had a very active and vengeful father in Damon Targaryen, who probably would have antagonized people a lot more, and if anything, may well have brought war forward. So the causes of war were still there, but Damon's presence, rather than having the two groups separated, which is what the solution eventually that they came to, or Viceroys came to separate the two groups, if it had been Damon rather than Laenor, then I suspect there would be bloodshed a lot earlier. Question from Reflective Rambling, picking one up for Tom Tretter. Thank you, Reflective Rambling. I love it when people do this. That's very, very kind of you. Thank you. I feel like we give Aegon II a bad rap for claiming the throne, but it was really Otto, Alicent, and Aemond pushing the needle. Do you think Aegon II had any potential? Sunfire is so cool. So Sunfire is his dragon, and yes, this was a beautiful, beautiful dragon. Was there any potential there for him as a person, other than the fact that he had a really cool dragon? Possibly, yes. It seems that Aemond was the more charismatic of the two, it has to be said. Aemon became a whole lot more embittered. Whether that was always there as a part of his personality, I don't know. But is he given a bad rap? He certainly doesn't end up in a good way. Aemon II. He, at the end, as well as feeding Rhaenyra to the dragon, he basically when he gets to King's Landing, he goes on a rampage rather than attempting to conciliate everyone and bring an end to this war that everyone's absolutely sick of by this point. He's having none of it, and he's just wanting to create more grievances all over the place, and so he ends up being poisoned. This is probably for the best of the kingdom in the long run, but he doesn't come across as, at the end of it, as a good person. Now, does he get a bad? Did he have any potential in his early years? Yes, I think so. As much potential as any, but I think the fact is that we have to remember these are still children, teenagers, really, and the war affected all of them horrifically. This is. I talked about how this traumatized Rhaenyra. All of this, the next generation down, were also similarly hugely traumatized by it. So, did he have a potential when he was younger? Yes, but that was taken away by the war, and I don't think he could have got to power without that war. Yeah, it wasn't him. He doesn't ever seem to be, when you read the accounts, he doesn't ever seem to be the one saying, but I'm the rightful king. This does seem to be other people who are pushing it for him. He's a lot more in the background. Berus Aurelius asking, is there anything reasonable Rhaenyra could have done to dull the green ambitions and preserve the realm? Well, not really. Apart from not be married to Damon, that would have definitely cooled things down. If Damon had just sort of gone and spiraled off somewhere, and which he was doing, he was losing power and influence, and him marrying Rhaenyra was his way back in. That was one of the big things, I think. So getting rid of Damon would have dulled Otto Hightower's vigor. I mean, it's not a nice thing to do, but somehow managing to get Kristen Cole out from where he was probably would also have helped calm tensions a little bit. Whatever it was that she did that hurt him so, if she could have mended some personal grievances there, yes, but there didn't ever seem to be a desire for it. She thought that she was going to be queen, which is a very unreasonable assumption to make. So why on earth should she be worried about other people who may have grievances against her? Right, Shannon Adams question, which starts out as a question that doesn't sound very sorry, I just got distracted. Lady Pushkin saying Robert went all Monty Python there. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Did I say that? I don't know. I sometimes go off on one eye and lose track on what I say. But yeah, he was a very naughty boy. Shannon Adams, I'm currently re-listening to the audiobooks and just covered the passage where Jaime remembers how Cersei got him into the Kingsguard. It seems rather suspicious that a teenage female court member could have this kind of influence without there being a special, possibly hidden connection to someone in power. We know that Cersei resembles her mother because of the vision that Jaime has where he confuses his mother for Cersei, and we know that Aerys lusted after Joanna. Am I crazy to think that Cersei may have been involved with Aerys while her father was Hand of the King? It may not have been overtly sexual, especially given Aerys's lack of grooming and his paranoia, but I just don't see how Cersei would be able to get Jaime appointed, especially without her father's knowledge. The link to this topic is if this is true, then there's a stronger comparison to be made between Cersei and Alicent Hightower. Absolutely. So let's. It's slightly convoluted to get through to today's topic, but the link is there, so we'll work our way to that. First of all, what are we talking about here? So we've got Cersei and Jaime. When Aerys, the Mad King, was still in power, and the situation is that there's a near complete breakdown in a relationship between Aerys and Tywin Lannister, his Hand of the King. Tywin is in King's Landing along with Cersei. Tywin has been trying to get Cersei and Rhaegar together without much success. But so Tywin is Hand of the King. Jaime is out sort of wandering the land, and when he happens to meet up with Cersei, Cersei says, I've just discovered our father wants to marry you off to Lysa Tully. I don't want that to happen. I want you to be here with me. I've got a cunning plan as to how I can make sure that you're here with me. I'll get you. A member of the Kingsguard just died. I'll try and get you appointed a member of the Kingsguard." And Jaime's like, "Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Surely Father's going to be a little bit annoyed about that because, I'm supposed to inherit Castle Rock." And she's like, "Well, would you want Castle Rock or do you want me? Surely you want me." And one night of passion later, he's signed up to this idea. She says, "Leave it with me." Then he heads back to Castle Rock, and a month later gets this letter saying Aerys II wants to make you a member of the Kingsguard, to which Tywin suddenly gets furious and quits as Hand of the King and takes Cersei back to Castle Rock. Jaime ends up in King's Landing and gets made a member of the Kingsguard. So, firstly, just as a complete aside, this is very much a Cersei kind of thing, is that she just doesn't think these things through. She thinks, "Oh, how do I get Jaime to King's Landing? Make sure that he becomes a member of the Kingsguard. Oh, but I didn't actually think through what would happen to me at that point. I would then be taken back to Castle Rock, so we're still not together." Very Cersei, thinking tactically, not strategically. But leaving that to one side, how could she possibly get him, Jaime, to become a member of the Kingsguard? Is it possible that she was the lover of Aerys II? Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. We don't know about it. Is it likely? Well, we get no hint of it from any of her POV chapters, so there's no evidence for it. I think the question is there a reasonable other way that she, with the skill sets that we know that she has, that she might have managed to make this happen? Well, I think there is. Personally, I think that there is a very clear thing that she could have done to get Aerys II to make Jaime a member of the Kingsguard, and that is simply to say in his presence the magic words, "You know what? If Jaime was made a member of the Kingsguard, that would really annoy Tywin." I think that's all it would take. I think that at the time, the relationship between Aerys and Tywin was so broken down. It was so horrendous. Actually, what Aerys wanted to do was just keep on jabbing at Tywin. I think that all she needed to do was to plant the idea in his head somehow. And I think that she, for all of she's a tactical thinker, not a strategic thinker, I think that she could figure out a way of doing that, of getting that thought into his head. So in any event, Aerys would have known that this would have annoyed Tywin, and he did it anyway. So whether he got it whispered in his ear and saying, "Can you please do this as a favor for me," or just dropped in as an idea somewhere that hoping he would pick up on it, I don't think it makes much difference. But I don't think it's necessary for her to have been Aerys's lover. Linking back into Rhaenyra and what we're talking about here, is there therefore a link between what Cersei was like and Alicent? The idea being that Alicent was she married Viserys, but she was there as the constant companion of Jaehaerys, the old king, before he died. That was why she was in court. The Hand, Otto Hightower, Tywin Lannister, brought her, Alicent / Cersei, into the court, ingratiated her there in an attempt to increase the power and influence of their great family, the Lannisters / the Hightowers, and with an idea of marrying them in to the heir to the throne. So there is an echo, there is a link there, but I don't think it is as strong. It worked with Alicent. Maybe it's because Alicent was a slightly different person. Lady Pushkin's saying it was but I'm the rightful king reminded me. Okay, that was it. That was the thing. Kelly Johnson saying Targaryens so willing to spill their own blood. Well, yes, they are. Reflective rambling. Want to hear Robert imitate Tom Bombadil? Remember to subscribe and hear it at the next big sub benchmark. Yeah, I did. I've not forgotten. I did make a promise about singing Tom Bombadil as and when this channel hits 400,000, just as a little thank you to my subscribers. I warn you, it's not something to be thankful for, but if that's what you ask, then that's what I shall provide. Lawnduck20 saying, hi, Robert. I hope you and Dan are having a great start to the new year. Thank you. We are. Rhaenyra quartered her sigil. Is this unique to her, or are there any other Targaryens in history that you can think of who have done the same? Also, why did Rhaenyra hate Nettles so much that she would call for her execution? Okay, so let's start with the sigil first. So we have, as we know, houses have their house sigils. So we have the Starks have got a direwolf, the Targaryens have got the three-headed dragon, and so on. In addition to that, individual people have their own sigils. Some we know about and some we don't. The example we have for Aegon II is that he took as his personal sigil a yellow dragon on a black background rather than the red dragon, because his dragon Sunfire was that beautiful, bright, sunshiny color. So that was his personal sigil. House Targaryen's sigil remained the same. The red dragon with 3 heads, his personal one was there. So when they went fighting, when the Greens went fighting in the Dance of the Dragons, those armies on his side had his personal sigil, because obviously both sides were Targaryens. So individuals often had sigils as well. We don't know many of them, is the short answer. We know lots of the sigils for the different houses, but for individual people, not so much. Heraldry is a huge subject. I won't claim to be an expert, but you have often not just a picture, but if you wish to show your heritage on a number of different sides, you might halve it. If you wish to show that you come from 2 different families, and then maybe you have one sigil on one half and another sigil on the other half, you might quarter it so you can have 4 different. When you start getting certainly the royal families of Europe, by the end, you could certainly get some people with, I think, even 16 different, these kind of like chessboard almost like sigils, complicated different things. And this is why heraldry, this was a proper profession, understanding who people were, what different things meant. You would have a stripe across. What does the stripe across mean? Or what does the shape of something mean? That all of these things had different meanings. So your personal sigil was to express not just your the specific family, the house that you're of, but also who you are and what your heritage is. We happen to know with Rhaenyra that hers was quartered. So it had 4 different things in it. 2 of those 4 were the Targaryen sigil, the 3-headed red dragon. One of them was the House Arryn sigil, and one of them was the House Velaryon sigil. This appears to be to show that she's Targaryen. Of course, she's Targaryen. Half of her sigil is Targaryen. However, her mother was from House Arryn, That's why the Arryns are there. And she married into House Velaryon. That's why the Velaryons are there. So that's her sigil. Is this different? This sounds very normal. It's not remarked upon when we're told about it as this. Curiously, this is she, unlike anyone else before her, did this. As I said, we're not told many others. We're told, I think it was Maekor he also had quartered, but bizarrely, for reasons that I don't quite understand, he had a Targaryen three-headed dragon in each of them, just almost to say, I'm very Targaryen. That's the kind of thing that you might do, trying to make a point. So do we know of any others who have got these complicated things? No, but that's not to say that they don't exist. In fact, they almost certainly do, because George R. R. Martin hasn't told us. He's told us huge amounts of detail about this world, hasn't told us the personal sigils of everyone. The second question you asked was about why Rhaenyra hated Nettles so much that she would call for her execution. Okay, so this Nettles is one of the dragon seeds. There were 5 dragon seeds. There were 2, almost certainly. They were illegitimate children of Corlys Velaryon, Adam and Alan Hull, who became legitimized as Velaryons. Then we had Ulf White and Hammer Guy. I've forgotten his name. Anyway, there's always, every single live stream I do, I always forget one vital bit of information. Somebody in the chat will pick up on it. And finally, we had Nettles. Now, the one died, 2 then switched sides, and then we're left with Adam Velaryon and Nettles. And at this point, this is when we have Rhaenyra in King's Landing, and everything is starting to go wrong. Everything is turned against her. She had thought, yes, I've won King's Landing, but actually we've got people unrest in the city. They're hating me. They're calling me names. We've got no money. The people I'd thought that were on my side and were going to be game changers are turning against me. My husband seems to have run off with his lover. Everything was going wrong for Rhaenyra. So this is the mental state of mind she is in at the time. Simply saying 2 of these people turned against me, therefore the other 2 are almost certainly going to be traitors as well. That in and of itself is not a particularly rational thing to do. So this is a state of her mind. The fact that she could even, the child of the person who was a father-in-law, her biggest and strongest ally, called as Velaryon, just basically saying he's a traitor when he's literally done nothing wrong, that was shooting herself in the foot. That was ridiculous. So going after Nettles doesn't seem to have a family of any influence that we're aware of. Why on earth did she want her killed? Well, clearly, whether it actually is the case or not, I've talked about this in a previous live stream, the most likely is that they are lovers. Damon was the lover of Nettles. Now, so yes, she would want her killed. It just fits in with the state of mind that she was in at the time. Hugh the Hammer, says Andrew Case. I knew there's always people who remember these things. Reflective Rambling saying, I'll remind you we were promised Dan picks for hitting 1,000 in charity, but given the season for Hats passing, will you accept copious photo drops perhaps? Okay, yes. So I meant to talk about that. My Christmas charity live stream, if you are one of the winners of one of those prizes, I'll be in contact with you over the next couple of days. If I've got contact details, otherwise I will try and make sure somebody... Otherwise, get in contact with me, basically. My email, my Twitter, whatever it is. There are a million different ways to get in contact with me. But I will try to get in contact with you first. I did say for getting to over £1,000, thank you everyone again, incredibly generous of you, that I would do a picture of Dan in the Santa hat. The season of festivities has indeed passed. Dan was not wanting to have his picture taken in the Santa hat, and I eventually took pity on him. I can understand that. He didn't want to get into the Christmas spirit, but I will offer something appropriate. Do not worry. I was thinking about that this morning. Disappointed that I couldn't offer you what I was hoping, but I will offer something appropriate, and I will let everybody know, probably on Twitter, actually. If you do not follow me on Twitter, if you are on Twitter, just hunt for In Deep Geek. You can find me there. While I'm doing thank yous, and on a slight digression, patrons, thank you. I say it all the time, but this I cannot do this without your support, and every single time I do these live streams, I just I am reminded of this fact, so thank you hugely. If you do want to support this channel, if you want to help it keep going and expand, then the best way to do that is by supporting on Patreon. There's a link down in the description. And what else was I wanting to say? There was one other thing I was going to say. Well Told Tale. Well Told Tale, I took a couple of weeks off over Christmas. For those who don't know, the Well Told Tale is my second channel. It's also running as a podcast. It is an audiobook channel. I audio narrate the best science fiction and fantasy stories ever. I just do it out there, always 100% free. I think these are amazing stories, and I want people to be able to access them. So if that interests you, on the podcast is a few weeks ahead of the YouTube channel at the moment. I'm going to try and get them back together. But I've just started this week an amazing story, The Picture of Dorian Gray. So if you're a fan of Oscar Wilde or just a fan of great literature, The Picture of Dorian Gray, it's a long old story. I think it's going to be over 10 weeks. Well worth it. Brilliant story. That's just started in the podcast. If you're following on YouTube, as I say, we're a few weeks behind that, but we've got some fantastic stories coming up over the course of the next few weeks. Off the top of my head, I think I've got another Isaac Asimov coming up. I think I've got John Polidori, the vampire, coming up, which is the original modern vampire story, if that's the way it sort of created the modern vampire mythos. There's a fantastic backstory to it. If you've never read the story, it's a great story in and of itself. But as a backstory, if you know the legendary short story competition that Frankenstein emerged from, when you had Byron and Shelley and Mary Shelley there, and they were telling ghost stories on a wet Wednesday afternoon in Switzerland. The biggest, most famous story that emerged from that, obviously, was Frankenstein. But the other story was written by this guy called John Polidori, who was Byron's surgeon who was there. And he wrote, based on an original idea from Lord Byron himself, he wrote this story called The Vampire. And this is what all modern vampire stories are sort of based off of. So, some really good stuff coming up on the Well Told Tale, if you like that sort of thing. So, quick through the chat. Lady Pushkin saying, "Can you do the line 'The Witch and the Wardrobe,' please?" Yes. So the other thing I would just say there, in terms of the Well Told Tale, I am currently doing majority public domain things. I am moving into things where I can buy the rights for. I've done a couple of these kind of things so far. I'm moving in the massive stories, the things like The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, Land of the Witch and Wardrobe. I would love to tell those stories, but copyright won't allow me. And buying the copyright, well, let's just say, to buy the copyright to adapt the Lord of the Rings, not even the main Lord of the Rings story cost $250 million for Amazon. So slightly beyond my reach. But yeah, I'm doing the greatest stories, the classic stories that increasing amounts of them are coming into the public domain. But if you love things like Frankenstein, if you like Edgar Allan Poe stories, if you like the classics like The War of the Worlds, Time Machine, that I've got all of them up there. So do go and check that out. Okay, let's go to a question from Mara Lee, saying, how do you think things would have turned out had Rhaenyra been allowed to rule as queen during her lifetime, as her father had wanted, instead of having her rule challenged by her younger half-brother? What if the Dance of the Dragons never took place? Who do you think would have inherited the throne after her death? Would there still have been a Dance of the Dragons issue, but between her heir and others contending for the throne? Just curious how things might have turned out and what the Maesters would have said in the history books. Yeah, interesting question. So if for whatever reason the coup had not happened, if the Greens had not tried to take the throne for Aegon, if Rhaenyra had been allowed to rule, what would have been like? Would she have been a good queen? I mean, there's no reason to think that she wouldn't have been. The realm was in a good position. The Jaehaerys had a very long reign, and he had established laws, a code of laws across the land. He'd started building things like the King's Road, getting the infrastructure set. He'd managed to get rid of a whole load of the crown debt. Things were going well financially. Viserys took over. We think of him as a weak king, but actually during his time, it was a time, broadly speaking, a time of peace, a time of huge prosperity. This was during Viserys. This was the apex of Targaryen reign and rule, according to the Maesters. So it was good. And that's what Rhaenyra would have inherited. So she would have had every good chance to keep that going. The crucial thing is, if the Dance of the Dragons never took place, then the Targaryen family and the amount of dragons presumably would have carried on growing. Because the whole point of the Dance of the Dragons, from a historical perspective, is that this turned this huge sprawling family with 20 dragons or more into a teeny tiny family, that there were only 4 dragons still alive at the end of it, and within a generation they'd all died out. It was the Dance of the Dragons that made the Targaryens weaker. If they had carried on the rate of growth that they had been going, and there was no reason to think that they wouldn't have done, if they had carried on, then Targaryen rule would have just got stronger and stronger. And inevitably, the Targaryen sort of gene pool would have spread a lot wider as well. It would have... they were marrying in with House Arryn. There was no reason to think. Also, the Baratheons as well, the Velaryons. Before you know it, there would have been most of the main families in. I mean, even the Farmans. When you actually think about it, there's most of the main families within a couple of generations would have had some Valyrian blood in there. So this would have just expanded out, and the number of dragons would have expanded out. So this would have been an entirely different Westeros that we've got. It would have turned eventually into something close to the Valyrian freehold if it had not been checked. That is why we start to think that the Maesters, when they saw the opportunity to get rid of the dragons, because unchecked, even after the dance, then the number of dragons and Targaryens would have increased again. That was only going one way. History was only moving in one direction. So that's what is there, but there would have been almost certainly another war. You're right that the arguments against her children Laenor, with Laenor, they were they looked like illegitimate children. They could have inherited, but there almost certainly would have been some people who would have challenged it. One of the rules of the Targaryens in this, certainly in the first half of their reign after Aegon's conquest, was that every generation there was a succession crisis. This isn't just a random thing that we just like pick up. Every generation had a succession crisis. We get Maegor basically claiming it by the throne by force. Jaehaerys basically claimed it by force. After Jaehaerys, nobody knew he had to call a great council to decide on who was going to inherit after him. After Viserys, we had the Dance of the Dragons. After then, that ended up with Aegon II. He got killed. Every generation there was a succession crisis with the Targaryens. There is no reason to think that would have changed at all in the next generation. So maybe they could have avoided the Dance of the Dragons then, but it was going to happen at some point anyway. On the last point you make, how would what would the Maesters have recorded in the history books? The Maesters, and you will see this particularly in the way that we've said that Aegon II said Rhaenyra is never going to be called a queen. I'm going to decree it from now on. She's only ever going to be recorded as a princess in the history books, and that's exactly what happened. Fire and Blood is a history book. She's not recorded as Queen Rhaenyra. She is not in the list of rulers. She ruled for 6 months. She ruled for longer than Aegon II did, but she was not counted as a ruler because she did not win. Her side won in the end, but she did not win. So she got written out of history as a ruler of Westeros. So how will the Maesters record it? They will record it however the powers that they are trying to influence and appease and suck up to want them to. If you read the opening to the World of Ice and Fire, this is, and it's the same with the opening to Fire and Blood. It's just this huge beatification of Robert Baratheon, the glorious reign, they call it. Is Robert Baratheon's reign really glorious? No, but this was exactly what the Maesters wanted to say, because they wanted to keep in power. They wanted to keep Robert Baratheon happy. So they will write the story of the victor. Question from Caius Ballerina. Did Viserys think Rhaenyra would be a better heir over Aegon? Why did he stick with her, even if it meant going against his wife and the council? So did Viserys think that Rhaenyra would be better than Aegon? Why did he stick with her, even if it meant going against his wife and the council? Well, I think we're not told, and he doesn't ever sort of give his reasons, but it's almost like he made his decision and then he stuck by it, and that seems fair enough. Did he think that she would make a good ruler? Almost certainly, because he trained her up to be a good ruler. He took her on. We're told that she came along to council meetings. She was by his side when he was ruling. She saw what he did. He was teaching her how to do it. He brought her up to be the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. So yes, he thought that she would make a good ruler. How about Aegon? I mean, we don't get the impression he doted on all of his children, but we don't get the impression that he viewed him as a future ruler. He didn't do the same things with him. So if in doubt, judge people by their actions rather than their words, because he didn't say many words on the subject. And his actions certainly show that he thought Rhaenyra should be the monarch, should be the ruler, not Aegon. Why did he go against his wife in the council? I think he didn't think the council mattered anymore. He was king. He got to decide, and he would be right about that. In terms of going against his wife, I think the point that we have to understand is that this wasn't until that moment when he died. This wasn't a claim on Aegon's part. This wasn't. Alicent didn't come out overtly and say, you should take that woman off of the ticket. You should make my son your heir. That's not how this seemed to work. That it was very much insinuations and snarky comments, that kind of thing. It was quite puerile in many ways. It was like people standing up and saying about, oh, what strong boys you have. And there's an insinuation about the fact that these children, Rhaenyra's children, looked like they were members of the Strong family, not members of the Velaryon family or the Targaryen family. That's the level this was at, rather than anything that ever approached, because the moment anything approached anything serious, that's the moment at which Viserys, his instant reaction seems to have been just to step back and say, I just don't want this to happen. Just take it away from me. That he was a conflict avoider is probably the way we would describe it now. He did not want that conversation. So what would have happened if he changed his mind and he said, okay, well, I'll go with this one rather than that one, rather than Rhaenyra, I'll go with Aegon. Well, Rhaenyra would have suddenly got up in arms, and he would have not had these other people there saying, well, this doesn't seem right. He would suddenly had Rhaenyra, and who's on Team Rhaenyra? Well, Damon's on Team Rhaenyra. Who else is on Team Rhaenyra? Corlys Velaryon, the most powerful lord in the land. He would have made enemies going the other way. So he just said, nope, don't want to discuss it. Andrew Case saying, I felt like I read somewhere that the C.S. Lewis estate was able to push The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe to nearly 2050 before being public domain, and surely it will get pushed again if they can. Well, they definitely will. They'll try and keep things in their own ownership as long as they possibly can. Copyright issues are very complicated, it has to be said, but things like Narnia stories, Lord of the Rings, their value is stratospheric, it has to be said. Cole Karsnarker saying, have I thought of doing Greek or Norse myths? Yes, I have. I've done a few things, like if you like 1001 Nights, I've done a few things like it's Sinbad, for example. And what else have I done? Can't remember, another one or two from 1001 Nights. But so I've done a few of those. I've also done a few of the fairy tales, the kind of the Grimm's fairy tales, particularly the ones that have been turned into Disney films. I quite like reading the original stories, Hans Christian Andersen as well, because they often are quite a lot, in many ways, more interesting. They're a lot darker, particularly a lot of these stories, and I mean they have a lot less show tunes, it has to be said, but they're good stories. Okay, I think that's me caught up on the chat. Actually, just quickly, Alexandra Vladimir saying there's a real lack of tiaras and crowns in Game of Thrones. Haven't missed it, but where is all that Lannister gold, really? So the Lannister gold is turned into huge amounts of things. A lot of it is in Casterly Rock. They've got I can't remember what it's called now. It's something like the Golden Hall or something like that they have, which is just this massively long hallway deep in Casterly Rock where they've just got all of their golden things just up for people to stare at and admire. So there's huge amounts of it there. A lot of it goes to the goldsmiths in... This is a complete digression, but it's an interesting one. A lot of it goes to the goldsmiths in Lannisport. There's a whole industry going on there, and Lannisport is one of the big ports. It's the last of the big ports if you're sort of going around the south coast. Once you've gone to old towns, you go Planky Town, Old Town, Lannisport around the south coast. So Lannisport's the last port of call. You would then fill up on your gold and things like that, and then come back down around the south coast. And that often ends up all the way over in Essos, actually. So a lot of it gets exported. So in terms of the crowns and tiaras not so much. Crowns, the reason we don't hear about them hugely is actually, ironically, because there were quite a few. For the Targaryens. The Targaryens had different crowns. Aegon the Conqueror had a crown. Jaehaerys had a crown. The crown that... so Aegon and Rhaenyra were crowned with different crowns, but both of them were Targaryen crowns of kings. I think Rhaenyra was crowned with the one that Viserys was crowned with, so she had her father's crown. But because they had different ones, there wasn't one clear, this is the crown of the king. So unlike, say, Blackfyre, the sword, very clearly that's the sword of the king. But there is no clear crown of the king. So that's why we don't hear about it so much, is that it's not one of the instruments of kinghood, so to speak. I have one more question from my patrons to come up. So now is a good time to drop things into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many questions in the chat as I can. Andrew K just saying, Alicent wanted Rhaenyra to marry Aegon II at one point, and Viserys I rejected it. That would have avoided many issues, but says something that Viserys wasn't having it. Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, I think Viserys gives the impression, I mean, again, he doesn't say this much, but of not being pro Targaryen intermarriage, because this was suggested. Rhaenyra could marry Aegon II, her half brother. He didn't want that to happen. There was also the suggestion maybe Rhaenyra could marry her uncle Damon. He didn't want that to happen. He was very angry when it did finally happen. He seems to be wanting his people to be marrying. He himself originally was married to an Arryn, and then he was married to a Hightower. He seems to be wanting to encourage people to marry outside of the Targaryens. So maybe he just, thought it a bit icky for having all of these intermarriages within the family, which is absolutely fine by me. So that's not necessarily a reason for him not wanting to have Viserys, but sort of not wanting to have Aegon married to Rhaenyra. The other, I have to say, it looks like it would solve the issue, but would it? Because you get, say, when Jaehaerys and Alicent married, then that meant they both understood what the deal was. Jaehaerys was the king, and Alicent, although they worked very closely together and she was a very proactive queen and she had a huge amount of power, she was one notch down. She was the queen. She was not the ruler. If Rhaenyra married Aegon, who's actually ruling? Would this have just created a problem in one marriage? Quite possibly. Archive, did Damon commune with a weirwood at the Isle of Faces? Not Damon. The issue is Adam Velaryon, who we're told landed on there, and then he flew off, got into a battle and died. So we don't know what happened. It's George R. R. Martin playing with us, because it's one of those things that you get. The Isle of Faces, you can say this, people can't attack it because if you try and sail there, you can't go there because if you try and sail there, then the winds will blow you away, or we'll get a flock of birds to come and start pecking at you. Whatever it is, that doesn't really apply to a whopping great big dragon just flying in and dropping down. So at some point, he probably did need to have a dragon doing that just out of pure interest. And the way he did that, writing it into the story, was a dragon did go in there, landed, then flew away, and the rider died. So we don't know what happened still. So this is him keeping the mystery going. Coach Ballerina is saying, how do you think the show can keep Rhaenyra's children's parentage somewhat ambiguous in the show if the Velaryons are a different race in the show? Well, I mean, I don't think this makes huge amounts of difference, to be honest. But the point is that they did not look like their father. Or their supposed father. That's the problem, is that people were saying they do not look like Laenor Velaryon. They look like a strong, and they can do that quite easily. They can make it look as if these children look like this person over here, not that person over there. So I don't. I can't see that the casting makes any difference. That if anything, it actually helps it. I would suggest this wasn't. And just to explain that, in universe, this wasn't something anybody argued about. It was pretty apparent. It was But what they looked like, no one could argue about. Everybody understood. At the very least, they understood the joke, even if they didn't think it was true. They understood the joke. So the fact that they don't look like their supposed father, they look like someone else, would I think it would be, if anything, supported by the casting. Sarah, awesome source. This is last question from one of my patrons saying, Rhaenyra goes a bit mad queen by the end of A Dance of Dragons, turning on people out of paranoia, such as Adam of Hull, and ultimately contributing to her own downfall, calling for the execution of a formidable dragon rider like Nettles. Had she chosen to turn a blind eye and kept Nettles in the fold, do you think the outcome could have been significantly different? Damon and Nettles dropping out of the sky together may have turned the tide through their skill as dragon riders, as well as their connection to one another. I actually like the idea of Dany accepting Fagon as a second head of the dragon, regardless of her knowing his true Blackfire heritage, and similarly turning on him at some point in the wars to come, also contributing to her own downfall. And then saying, thank you for all that you do. Please give Dan some scratches later from all of his loyal fans. I will definitely do that. Probably not until he wakes up, though, because he doesn't like to be woken up when he's starting to get a bit grizzly in his middle age. When he's asleep, he does like his sleep. So we've got so the first part of that question, in terms of Damon and Nettles, would it have made a difference if she just said, "Okay, Nettles, you can stay on side"? I don't think necessarily it would. So the situation was that Damon needed to fight Aemond. This was the battle that had to happen, regardless. Damon and Aemond, and Damon basically wanted it. He could have said, "Nettles, come with me. We'll fight him together." He didn't. He wanted to do this dragon fight. The two of them, one-on-one, see who's the best. Let's slog this out. There have been huge amounts of history there between the two. So that was where he was going. So that wouldn't have, regardless of what happened with Nettles, even if Rhaenyra hadn't threatened to kill Nettles, that would have been fine. That would have carried on as it was. But if she hadn't threatened to kill Nettles, what would Nettles have done? Might she have gone back and fought for Rhaenyra? I personally, the timing of this is interesting, because the tide had turned by that point. Once Damon had gone, and Nettles owes no particular allegiance to Rhaenyra. Let's not forget this. She got her dragon, and then she was fighting and spending time with Damon mostly. So that's where her loyalty lies. Once Rhaenyra's starting to lose this, what reason does she have to stay with her? Not really much of one. She clearly didn't have any personal ambitions, Nettles. She survived the war. She went to the Mountains of the Moon, and she seems to have just basically lived her own hermit's life. And there with the mountain clans, she could have landed on the top of the Eyrie and claimed that for herself. She didn't do that. So she didn't seem to have any personal plans. I don't think that it would have made any difference. I think that Nettles came into the story without any personal allegiances. She gained one to Damon. When Damon died, she just went back to living her own life, is my take. On the second part of the question, you're saying, I actually like the idea of Dany accepting Fagon as a second head of the dragon, regardless of her knowing his true Blackfire heritage. And similarly turning on him at some point in the wars to come, also contributing to her own downfall. Yeah, so I've always gone with the idea, and all of my what you might call theories, these are working hypotheses. If more information comes to light, if someone suggests something, gives me more evidence that I was unaware of, and obviously when we get the next book, I will happily change my view on what it is. I'm not going to stand on any or die in any ditches over any of these. I'm just trying to enjoy and understand these books the same as everybody else is. So my understanding of what seems most likely to happen is that Fagon will take King's Landing. He will be there, and then Dany arrives. But by this point, she is absolutely obsessed with becoming, with taking the Iron Throne herself. Then she discovers someone is there already. She will ask around, who is this person? He claims to be Aegon. Is it possible that he is? Who are her advisors going to be? Well, she's going to have Tyrion, who will say, well, I don't know, but as far as I'm aware, that guy died. And then she is going to pay attention to Quaithe, and she's going to be paying attention to the prophecies or the visions that she got in the House of the Undying, and suddenly it's going to be about the Mama's dragon. She has to be showing the lie. So this everything seems to be hinting towards the fact that she will somehow, perhaps the dragons won't like him, I don't know what, somehow he will die. But whether she accepts him first, I personally think that makes for a much, much longer story. Maybe that is what George R. R. Martin is writing, who knows. But I think the idea of her arriving at King's Landing, which she probably will do at the end of the Winds of Winter, in A Dream of Spring, is there time for her to make an alliance with Fagon, grow to like and trust him, and then destroy him afterwards, and then also what we assume will happen with the falling in love with Jon, and then the breaking apart of that. I don't think that all fits into one book. Personally, I think she just has a relatively short encounter, but I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay, that's my last question from my patrons. So let's go to a few things in the chat. Callie Summer saying that's an interesting point. Why didn't Nettles want to take at least a little power? Maybe their throne looked too fraught, but a medium-sized keep defended by a dragon is more comfortable than a cave. Yeah, I can only assume she simply had no desire to. That's the only working assumption I think we've got there. We don't know huge amounts about Nettles. Yes, we see her, but we don't get many first-hand accounts of her. Lady Pushkin saying that Iron Throne is going to shred Fagon to pieces. Yeah, maybe. Matt and Kyoko Williams saying Quaithe is lying. It's Aegon. He's a good dude. I think that he will definitely turn out to be as good a potential ruler as any that the Seven Kingdoms could get, and I think that may well be the irony that George R. R. Martin is going to play with here, is that he's not technically the right ruler, but would he be a good ruler? Definitely. Yeah, I think it's going to be there's definitely going to be a hint of tragedy there. Lally Windland saying it would be ironic if Rhaenyra's kids were Laenors and looked like their Arryn ancestors. Anyway, their mother was certain, and it was her inheritance discussed, not their father's. Yep. So this is all about, as you say, this is about Rhaenyra and her inheritance. Andrew Case saying, compared to usual Targaryen marriage incest, a cousin is practically a stranger, a common amongst nobility. Yeah, Ned's parents are cousins. Tywin and Joanna are cousins. Yeah, definitely cousin marriage seemed to be common, not just among the Targaryens, but much wider. And I think that is so. Lady Windland saying, if I were Dany, I would offer Fagon a dragon. Blackfire or Targ, prove yourself by riding a dragon if you can. Yeah, that, I mean, in my mind, that's what happens. I have absolutely no evidence. This is the kind of thing where once you're far enough into the future of the story, I think it really, I mean, George R. Martin can take it wherever he wants with that, and it really is a matter of how these different stories that he's trying to intersect all come together in his mind. But yeah, that's certainly how I would see it happening, and the dragon turns on him. Callie Summers saying, I don't want to be president, but I like living in a building with plumbing. Get the point. This is the Nettles point. Absolutely. Reflective Ramblings saying, asking any thoughts on Mushroom being as appreciated by Rhaenyra almost as much as he thinks, as in she appreciated or trusted or at least wasn't horrid to him. Yeah, so he, whatever the truth about Mushroom, it certainly seems apparent that he was recognized, accepted, and respected by the people who chose him. So the fact that he hung around with Rhaenyra seems to be that she at the very least tolerated him, and she may have even liked him. A good, effectively, court jester is what he was. A fool. They can say truths and get away with them, and so wise rulers, and this is Shakespeare played with this idea a huge amount as well. Wise rulers trusted their fools because they're fools. Of King Lear, magnificent. Just read that for a treatise of how the wise king trusts the fool, and because the fool talks the truths even when the king is talking nonsense. So that's the kind of the feel that I suspect we'll get there. But the reason we love Mushroom is because not because he may speak some truths unto power, but because of his rather more ribald approach to history than the rather fuddy-duddy maesters who, yes, they do a good job, but their prejudices come through very clearly, and it's nice to have someone coming at it from a slightly different perspective. Sarah, awesome source. Thank you so much. Saying Richard McCarthy. You're picking up something from someone else. Thank you very much. Saying, I still think Dany's heritage is a lot more questionable than is typically accepted. Thematically, the Red Door has to lead to something. What can it be other than a revelation about her childhood? Oh, okay. So interesting question. So I'll take 2 points on this one. The first one about her heritage being a lot more questionable than is typically accepted. I'm very happy with, as I said earlier, I'm very happy to change my tune on a lot of these things. I've not seen any substantive evidence to suggest anything other than the story that we're told about Dany and the story she believes about herself as being the truth. We know that from other sources, we know that her mother was pregnant. We know that she gave birth. We know that her mother died. We know that they went off with Viserys. So what's the? I struggle to see where the conspiracy would possibly fit in. But in terms of the Red Door, now this is quite interesting. So it's thematically the house with the red door is home for Dany. And this is one of those things, and this gets repeated again and again and again. It's something like a dozen different times. She thinks this is her safe place. This is the one moment in time when she felt at peace and felt purely happy. And so does it symbolically mean some secret that she's running to this red door? Well, maybe. I mean, I don't think it necessarily does. I think that it could just be what we're told. It symbolizes happiness. It symbolizes innocence. It symbolizes that part of Dany which is definitely there. There are two parts of Dany which are always fighting each other. There's the fire and blood Dany that we will see a lot more of in the Winds of Winter, and then there's the homebody, peace-loving Dany, slave-freeing Dany that we saw quite a lot of in the Dance with Dragons, and also quite a bit of the earlier stuff as well. So these two things are fighting each other, and it's almost like we get she hits the house with the red door, the peace-loving Dany, and then we get Quaithe coming in with all the fire and blood stuff, and it's this fight for Dany's soul going on. So that is, for me, that is a perfectly good literary understanding of what is going on there. Might there be something, a darker secret behind there, locked somewhere in her subconscious? Possibly, but it doesn't have to be a big secret. If it could work just as well, if we are to accept that, which I don't necessarily accept that, but if we were to accept that this is some secret, then it could just be that at the end of that, she finds that this is that tragic moment that she's not talked about much, she's not remembered much, but it happened, which is when she got and Viserys got chucked out of their home, the house with the red door, when they came in to find their guardian dead, to find their protector gone, to find their servants looting the quarters, and to have Viserys grab her and say, right, we're going. That would be a traumatic childhood moment. The moment that her childhood, her innocence was just ripped away from her. The safe place was taken from her. That could be it just as much as anything else. So, as I say, I don't necessarily buy into the idea that there is something when, yes, she's sort of running happily towards the house with the red door, but it's the red door is not the only specific thing. We also hear about, the lemon tree. We also hear about the carvings. We also hear about lots of other things. So it's not just about a red door. Terra Incognita longing. Yes, absolutely. Stevie Diamond, a lot of red, the Red Keep, the Red Viper, Red Priest, exactly. Yes, so red, fire and blood is red. This is as I say, so to take and I'm not saying this is a theory in any way, shape or form, but this works as well as anything else if you're trying to take this symbolically. If this is a memory that Dany has locked inside of the house with the red door, symbolically red for her, this is her fire and blood. This is her not calm, peaceful place. This is the place of conquest and damage and hurt. That, on the other side of that red door, is the end of her childhood, the end of the peace-loving Dany. That's when she goes through and finds reality. And that is where she keeps on coming back to. and that is where she's going to be heading to. We're going to see George R. R. Martin has told us we're going to be seeing more of Fire and Blood, Dany. Her story is going to take a darker path in the next book. Okay, reflective rambling, hashtag tinfoil. Thanks. I try my best not to go down tinfoil, but why not? Every now and then. Actually, I might do another tinfoil. I was thinking about this. Maybe I'll do another tinfoil Thursday one day just to get all of these ones back out of the way. I did one about a year ago and it was a whole load of fun. So if you would like me to do another tinfoil Thursday, which is just going through random tinfoil theories, you can just bring whatever random tinfoil theories here. Just put a thing down in the comments, and if enough people want it, then maybe I will do that. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to start to bring this one to a close. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you like this format of having a good chunk at the beginning where I can set out the background, the history, the lore on the subject, and then going through the questions afterwards. As I say, I think that really works for me. I hope it does for you too. Next week, we are going to be... what did I say? Oh, yes, we're going to be looking at the other side. We're going to be looking at the Hightowers, Alicent and Otto Hightower. We touched upon their motivations a little bit here, but there is so much more to work our way through. And it's good. A lot of the time we do focus on the blacks, but the greens, they're not just cartoon baddies. There's a lot more going on there. So we need to understand what this is. That's what we're going to be looking at this time next week. If you are watching this back a little bit later and you would like to watch a few more of these live streams on other subjects, there will be a link appearing somewhere around here. If you would like to support this channel, if you would like to get access to some of the things I do just for my patrons, like priority questions for live streams, there is a link appearing somewhere around here. Okay, that's all for this time. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much to my wonderful moderators. Thank you so much to my patrons. And thank you for all the fantastic questions. Take care, everyone.